Let's begin. Siona, we have already started. Can you begin?
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Siona Salvi, member of Kaash Foundation. We at Kaash Foundation are extremely delighted to welcome you all on 5th day of second International Faculty Development Program organized by Kaash Foundation Center for Academic and Professional Development on the theme of Pedagogy of Teaching History in collaboration with University of Canada, Ottawa, St. Xavier's Institute of Education, Mumbai. Second International Faculty Development Program of CAPD commenced from 3rd of August 2020. We have signed in for this 5th day. I may call upon Dr. Elvina Pereira to guide us and instruct us with some guidelines about the session. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and welcome once again to the second International Faculty Development Program on the theme Pedagogy of History. Today is the 5th day of the Faculty Development Program, and on behalf of Kaash Foundation, University of Ottawa, Canada, and St. Xavier's Institute of Education, I would really like to thank all the participants for putting in your efforts to give us such a very meaningful, very helpful, and above all, very reflective feedback. And we really appreciate that from our end. Now, we would like to say a few things as far as participation and feedback is concerned. First of all, it's a kind request from our side not to share the link. When you get the link for the everyday to join the meeting, a humble request to all the participants, please do not share the link with any one of your friend or anybody. Second and very important thing that we wish to convey to you is that we know many of us, we are teachers, and there are also student teachers, those who are going to become teachers. And my dear student teachers and teachers, a humble request is that please give meaningful feedback. That is one thing. And see to it that you follow the criteria which is given there when you write down your feedback, so that we are able to get a very concrete and, as I said, a reflective feedback. So kindly follow the stipulated rules and regulations while you are giving the feedback. Third and the most important thing we wish to bring it to your notice is that kindly finish your feedback on the same day. So today is day 5. So please give your feedback approximately by 10 p.m. every day. That's the deadline that we are requesting you all to follow, so that we get the feedback on daily basis, and then you are also able to recollect your thoughts and your experiences to give us a very meaningful feedback. So once again, we really thank all the participants for putting in efforts to give us concrete feedback, and we request you all kindly follow the guidelines as far as giving feedback is concerned, and please do not share the link with anybody outside. And the last and very important thing, sometimes the organizing committee will ask you to give us the proof as far as your registration is concerned, or maybe fee receipt. So kindly do so, because they would like to check certain records as far as participation is concerned. So please cooperate as far as feedback is concerned. And if any query comes from the organizing team, kindly cooperate. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for the guidelines. Yesterday, we had two prominent scholars for the session with us on board. Dr. Upadhyay shared insightful topic with us on reflection of anomalies and discrepancies in teaching history. Another prominent speaker was Professor Dr. Vasant Shinde, who shared with us informative topic on multidisciplinary approaches to reconstruct authentic history. The session was moderated by Dr. Kiran Sawant. For today's session, we have two remarkable speakers, Dr. Arun Bandopadhyay and Professor Dr. Manjari Kamal. Today's session will be moderated by Dr. Mukesh Kumar, Head of Department of History of Magadha University, Bodh Gaya, Bihar. I may request now Dr. Mukesh Kumar to take over the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Salvi. Am I audible? Hello? Hello?
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Okay, thank you. But I think video is not working. Video is working? No.
Like your video is not seen. You're audible, clearly audible.
But I am audible. Okay, let me start. Because when video is working, audio stops, and when audio is working, video stops. Anyway, the program must go on. And thank you, Salvi, once again. And I'm Mukesh. Very good afternoon to all of you. This is hello.
Dr. Mukesh, kindly continue. We can all hear you. Please do not interrupt and stop. Please continue.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, of course. So, welcome everyone to the Faculty Development Program on Pedagogy of Teaching History, being organized by Kaash Foundation in collaboration with University of Ottawa and St. Xavier's Institute of Education, Mumbai. I'm very thankful to Dr. Kaash Yadav, Director of the Kaash Foundation, who has invited me to be here in this program. And in fact, it is a rare opportunity for me to be here as a moderator during presentation of two renowned historians, Professor Arun Bandopadhyay and Professor Manjari Kamal. As we know, teaching history has taken a great turn. In fact, learning history has taken a great turn in the recent years. As we know, history is the analysis and interpretation of the human past, enabling us to study continuity and changes that is taking place over time. It is an act of both investigation and imagination that seeks to explain how people have changed over time. Historians use all forms of evidence to examine, interpret, revisit, and reinterpret the past. These include not just written documents, but also oral communication. So what I think, history is the study of life in society in the past, in all its aspects, in relation to present development and future hopes. So here I will start. Hello. Here I will start first with Professor Arun Bandopadhyay. I will invite him. But before I invite Professor Arun Bandopadhyay to speak on the theme which has given to me for his lecture as Teaching History for All, Pedagogy reformulated to make it both incisive and attractive, I would like to say something about him. Professor Bandopadhyay, formerly Nurul Hasan Chair, Professor of History, University of Calcutta, is presently the Historical and Archaeological Secretary at Asiatic Society, Kolkata. His research interest is in the field of agrarian history, business history, science and environment history, and he has authored a number of monographs, and he has been editor of several volumes on these related topics, subjects. In the brief write-up which has been given to me, there are 3 books: Nature, Knowledge and Development, Critical Essays on Environmental History of India, which he has authored in 2016, published by Primus. In 2020, we have got 2 books by him. One is Prabuddha Bharat, Understanding Ambedkar in the Passage of Time, by Asiatic Society, published by Asiatic Society, and another one by Manohar Publications, that is Documents on Economic History of Northern India in the late 19th century, Quality of Life, volume 1st. It has been published in 3 parts. The first volume has been authored by Professor Bandyopadhyay. But I wouldn't like to stop here, because I know Professor Bandyopadhyay with his book Agrarian Economy of Tamil Nadu, 1820 to 1855. The structure of the agrarian economy has been analyzed there. Land, labor, capital, output, everything was there, which has been explored. Irrigation, soil type, rainfall, taxation, tax collection. I mean, small peasants, tenants, hired labor, bonded labor, everything was there incorporated in that book. And I have found that book very much interesting whenever I try to understand the agrarian economy of India. It was wonderful. It is a wonderful book, and it is always with me. In fact, the video is not working. Otherwise, I would have shown to the audience the book. Next, I would like to say about 5 books which have been edited by Professor Bandyopadhyay. First was in honor of Professor B.B. Chaudhary, In Quest of the Historian's Craft. Another one, Tribes, Forest, and Social Formation in Indian History. Third one, Science and Society in India, 1750 to 2000. And then 2 volumes. One, Eastern India in the late 19th century, and another one is Southern India in the late 19th century. Remarkable volumes have been produced by Professor Bandyopadhyay. No words I have to explain, to say about the depth of the knowledge of Professor Bandyopadhyay, the reach of his researches. And without wasting any time, I think it is the high time to invite Professor Arun Bandyopadhyay to speak on the topic Teaching History for All. Teaching history for all and making pedagogy incisive and attractive. So now I request Professor Bandyopadhyay to please take over and present your paper. Sir.
Thank you, Dr. for saying.
Hello.
Hello. Thank you, Dr. Mukesh Kumar, for saying a few nice words about me. And it actually went back to my research career almost 50 years back. So I was wandering through all those periods when Dr. Mukesh Kumar was speaking. Of course, grateful to the authorities of Kaash Foundation and the University of Ottawa, and also the St. Xavier's College for kindly giving me this opportunity to share a few of my thoughts to these teachers, the faculty teachers, the Faculty of History department at various colleges and universities during this next 1 hour. I will speak about 1 hour, and of course there will be discussion about half an hour. But I will be trying to be brief as much as possible, because I personally believe that questions are more important than sometimes the answers. And when question and answers come together, that is the best session. The best session, I hope, will come after my presentation, and I am also looking forward to my panelist, Professor Manjuri Kamath, who will speak after me, and I will also hear her presentation, and I will try to interact if possible during that time also. And of course, the entire opportunity actually came through a person who was, I think, Abkas, Dr. Abkas Yadav, who first called me and told me that if I'm willing to share some of my ideas. And I realized that this is the entire project of the searching for the pedagogy of history teaching at the faculty level, which has been the moot concern of the Kaash Foundation in this occasion, is very important. And I have taken it up because of various reasons. And one very important reason is this, that though history is becoming more and more a subject for the specialist, like all other subjects, but we should not forget that history is a part of liberal arts, and though the entire question of the history is a part of social science or liberal arts, this has become a long drawn out story now. But when, sorry, but when we started our research work from the 1970s onwards, history was increasingly becoming a social. We are also hearing history is a liberal arts subject as it was thought earlier. So the one very important question which remain with us, that if we want to teach history, we may teach for the list, but at the same time, we should also think that how can we teach history for all? All means it's a very dangerous words because of the fact that now there are the question of parallel history. Now there are question of popular history. Now, of course, there is a question of academic history and more rigorous, more actually history. So these are all there. But I think at the end of the day, history must be intelligible to many. And for this, of course, the writers have something to do. Those writers who write on history and their history books are being sold in great numbers, they are responsible. But at the same time, the most important group of people who are responsible for making history intelligible to a large number of audience, whether it may be in the school or it may be in the colleges or in the university. Sorry. You can, yes. So this is very, very important. So what I'm trying to point out here is this, that my theme of presentation today is, can you think of some kind of history teaching for all, but at the same time, you can incorporate some of the findings of the latest researches, as well as we can make the entire learning and teaching history at the same time very interesting. So it will be both interesting as well as what I should say, the oriented, as well as what I should say, that it should be connected with what is being now stated, now written, now researched. So the new research as well as the intelligent. So these two things are very important. As a result, I have actually selected this theme, that it may be in the form of a question mark also. Can we think of a certain kind of history teaching which is teaching for all? And though it is teaching for all, it's not very simplistic. It is not very something which is called so-called parallel history, which has nothing to do with the rigorous discipline of history. But at the same time, it is very interesting. Now, for this, actually, we have to go through some of the very important aspect of the entire question of the exercise of history teaching. Now, what makes effective history teaching important? If we try to make history teaching for all or teaching for some initiated group, it must be effective. Now, what make this effective teaching very important to all? So part of, that history, particularly not only in India but throughout the world, history is increasingly becoming part of social sciences, considered as social sciences. Just think of the book which was the product of the Gulbenkian Commission, Open the Social Sciences. That book was written by no less a person than Immanuel Wallerstein, who was the famous sociologist, had great interest in history, and the writer of the Modern World in 3 volumes. In 3, so this is very important. So while doing this, actually three very, first of all, let us important aspect of history teaching. You know that there are 3 aspects of any kind of history writing or any kind of history teaching, and these 3 aspects are: one is certain concern for chronology, second is certain, of course, a certain concern for the space we are talking about, and finally, and most important of all, concern persons, human beings, we shall tackle it. So these are the 3 things: chronology and persons. Now, this is not that easy because of the fact that, that when Sardar K.M. Panikkar, who was an Oxford graduate and who for some time taught even in Aligarh Muslim University, in 1920, he left that post, and Muhammad Habib, father of Habib, joined in that post as reader of history in Aligarh Muslim University. But later on, that India became independent. Sardar K.M. Panikkar, Nehru made him the ambassador to China. And later on, amongst all his work, he wrote a short book on the survey of Indian history. And this entire survey of Indian history, 5,000 years of Indian history, was finished in 300 pages. But why did he write this? He told in the very beginning, in the preface, that he tried to touch some of the important history books, and he found that they are like telephone directory. In the telephone directory, so many names are there, they are not connected, we cannot remember them. In history also, there are so many names, and if we do not understand the relationship, we will not remember them. That is a very important question. Another thing that which Panikkar has not stated, but some other people have stated, my teacher, Professor Ashin Dasgupta, used to tell us many times, that what is the exact role of chronology in history writing and history teaching. Now, you know that Battle of Plassey took place in the month of June 1757. And now, and the Sepoy Mutiny or the revolt of 1857 took place in Mirat. In first.
Hello. Hello, Arun sir. Hello.
Can you hear me?
Arun sir. Yes, sir. I just wanted to let you know that can you be more loud and clear, sir? The participants are unable to hear you, sir.
So okay. So I shall be louder, and now I hope that you can hear me. Okay.
Yes, like there's a
Can you
little
hear me
bit.
now?
Yeah, sir. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Yes, sir.
So with regard to chronology, this is a very important thing, that so many dates are there. So how many dates someone can remember? Now we know that Battle of Plassey took place in the month of June 1757, and the main revolt of 1857 started in Meerut in May 1857. Now, if someone forgets the month of the happening of the Battle of Plassey, or the month of the happening of the revolt of 1857, Professor Ashwin Dasgupta used to tell us there is no problem at all. But if someone forgets which one takes place earlier, Battle of Plassey or the revolt of 1857, then actually the history, that kind of forgetfulness has nothing to do with history, because you know that you cannot do that. The entire question of the revolt of 1857 are generally explained of the 100 years of British rule in various parts of India and its effects. So if you do not remember that Battle of Plassey took place prior to that revolt of 1857, you are not progressing in history. So chronology is not that thing. And of course, with regard to persons or personalities, you know that earlier history was thought of actually the anecdotes, the story, great men, whether in politics or in literature or in science or in many other fields. But now history has come to ordinary people. And so we can say, instead of personalities, persons are important. But you know that we should know that we cannot tell of all persons in the past. There is certain limitation to it. I will come to that question later on. Now, before I progress further, how to teach history, if we want to teach history for all, I think that again we can go back to another classic which is known to all, that is E.H. Kaash, What is History? Now you will find that E.H. Kaash told us that if any person takes up a book, he looks at two things. Anybody, title of the book and the author of the book. These two are very important. But if a history student takes up a book, he looks after another thing also. In addition to the title of the book and the author of the book, he or she looks at the date of publication of the book. Because there is an understanding that all history is dated. That is to say, history progresses over time. Time in the sense that the way Ashoka was discussed, the King Ashoka was discussed in the beginning of the 19th century and in the beginning of the 20th century and in the beginning of the 21st century may not be the same. So actually same can be stated about history teaching. History teaching also cannot be unrelated to what is happening in the realm of history writing, history research. Even if we teach history for all, even then we want to impart whatever new knowledge that we gather from our own understanding of history, our own reading of history, our own awareness of the current researches on history. It should go to the audience who are attending the class of history teaching. So this is very important, that the teaching that I have made, like the book, like the research that I have made or somebody has made 100 years ago, and that you, the younger faculty members, are doing to may not be the same. Similarly, the book that was written 100 years ago and today may not be the same. And similarly, history teaching that was done even 10 years ago and now may not be the same. So history teaching is also dated. I would say, like history is dated, history teaching is also dated. Now, here, you know that one very important is this, that is this, that there is, past is unlimited, but history is limited. This we must recognize, because you know that whatever has happened in the past, innumerable number of events in innumerable directions cannot be captured by history in a comprehensive way. So there is no the comprehensive history of any region. It may be, even if it is done like our great historian Sabyasachi Bhattacharya has done a comprehensive history of modern Bengal from 1700 to 1950, recently published by Asiatic Society, and written by contributed by about more than 65 persons throughout the world. Even then, he has named the book not the comprehensive history of modern Bengal. It is a comprehensive history of modern Bengal. It is comprehensive because many people have contributed in it. But in a sense, there is no possibility of the comprehensive history of any place, any country, any district, any continent. So this is very, very important. So past is unlimited, but history is always limited. And this has been very interestingly discussed by Collingwood, the idea of history, when he has given the famous example, Caesar crossed the Rubicon. That means the river Rubicon. So what does it mean? An emperor called Julius Caesar crossed a river called the Rubicon, which was within the Roman Empire. Now, after crossing the Rubicon, there was a remarkable extension of the Roman Empire, and that can be discussed. But Collingwood asked this question: how do you know the effects of the Caesar crossing the river Rubicon? So he said that it is an enactment of the thought, the mind of the agent at the time of the crossing the river Rubicon. That is to say, a person who is looking at it is thinking that what Caesar was, and people connected with Caesar was thinking about the crossing the river Rubicon and what are the different kinds of its effects. And as a result, he said another very important thing, that all history is contemporary. Indeed, I was examining the script of the NET examination in Baroda once upon a time, and I found there was a question of all history is contemporary. Do you agree? So one person has written, I am an ancient historian. Another person has written, I am a medieval historian. I do not believe that all history is contemporary. But they forgot that actually whatever someone is writing even of a remote past, is writing in the present. So there is a mediation of the present over the past. So all history writing happens to the mediation of the present. But unlimited past was not the present. It is an abstraction. That so many things have happened, and we can only cover only parts of it, not the whole of it. We be able to never cover the whole of it. For sometimes we would be interested in certain groups of people. They may be parliamentarians, they may be important people. Certain other points of time, we may be interested in the rioters because we are discussing the food riots. So according to our interest, actually our interest to persons will change, from the great men to the ordinary men, from the laborer to the peasants, from men in general to women in particular. So like this, even to the transgender people nowadays. So this is very, very important. So we should know this. Now, before going further, I will tell you another very important thing, that 2 or 3 very important things we should always remember. We should remember that even if history is a concrete subject, history is not a subject of abstraction, but we cannot understand the concrete subject without the help of certain ideas. And in this case of history teaching and in the case of history writing, three very important ideas nowadays becoming more and more important. And they're all problematics, but they should be identified in the very beginning. They should be identified before we learn something. They should be identified before we read something. And they should be identified before we teach something. What are they? One of them is the question, entire question of fact. What is a fact in history? This is a very, very important. You know that parallel history might take certain kinds of things as facts, which the rigorous academic historians may dispute. So the fact is very, very important because the philosophical dimension of. We should remember, you know, that in certain literature of postmodernism, even it is so much questioned that they are no longer interested in broad facts. They're interested in only, not events, but only fragments. Only fragments. Not events, but only fragments. So this is one thing. But we should remember that if we deny the importance of fact in history, then history is dead. Certain facts we cannot deny. We cannot deny that there was a battle of Plassey. We cannot deny that there was 15th of August 1947 as far as India is concerned. We can think of its effect in various ways. Whether, for example, in 1947, when India became independent, the political freedom we got, whether at the same time we got the economic freedom, social freedom also. So that question remained important, and some people at that time thought that ye azadi jhuta hai, but later on they also realized that it is not fully true. Actually, something very important happened on 15th of August 1947, though it was not complete. So fact is a very, very important thing in history, and though these facts are actually disputed time and again by various groups by various historians in various ways, and even by the parallel historians, parallel history, they look at facts at a different way, but we cannot say that there is no fact. So this fact question is a very, very important question in history, and whatever teaching we do, we have to be aware of this fact question. The second question nowadays, which is very rather recent one, called meanings. So it is when history turns linguistic, history turns when the discourse became very much important. So suddenly these meanings become very much important, and it has a lot of things that happened in the last 30-40 years in the writing and in the research and writing of history. For example, when we started our research in the 1970s, as far as India was concerned, economic history was very, very important. But by the end of the 1970s, the social and cultural history becoming more and more important. And in the 1990s, cultural history became so important that they actually dispute economic reality and the social reality. So we have come to such a stage where actually and society is nothing but a text. A text means something to discuss, and text does not, and the creation of the mind. It is not the creation of the reality. Now, this type of meanings, we should not go to that extent of deciphering meanings. Indeed, Hayden White, who has written the famous book called Meta History, and whose 25th edition has also occurred. And I was reading the 25th edition in Nehru Memorial Museum and Library one day, and Hayden White has written that how the book was refused by various groups of people when it was published in various universities. I think finally published by the Standard University, Princeton University, most probably. So in 1972, and so many criticisms have been made, and he has thought that how imagination has interfered, and as a result of which, actually, even sometimes we say that what is the difference between history and novel? You know that I hear this question time and again, but I said that take, take some of the very important novelists like Amitabh Ghosh, and ask him that how would he like to say about his creations, a history book or a novel? I will find that Amitabh Ghosh will say it's a novel. So novel and history has certain similarities in terms of imagination, but not all. So that has to be remembered. And Hayden White, when he wrote that he will not change any part of the text, he realized that he went too far, meta history, in that meta history. How the imagination actually, for example, Marx or Tocqueville, he has discussed their role, etc., etc. Now, anyway, so this and third important question is interpretation. Interpretation is one thing which is very, very important as far as history is concerned. But I will suggest this interpretation should be limited. It is we have scope. We have scope to look things differently. Yes, there is a classic story in Agatha Christie's novel. A 6th standard girl student came back from school and asked her father that there are so many other books of other subjects like geography. Most of the cases, all geography books say the same thing, but not all history books. They say something different. And her father said that when all history books will tell the same thing, that will be the death of history. Now, that means, well, that H. also has recognized this, that there is a very important subjective element in history writing, and also in history teaching there will be a subjective element. There is no doubt about it. But there are certain objective elements also. So how the subjective element and objective element will work together, that will be the answer to the academic historian, to the parallel historian. Parallel historian will not bother about anything. They will say whatever they believe, etc., etc. So these are the three things: fact, meanings, and interpretation. Actually, we have to recognize that though there are certain disputes on certain facts, but there must be facts. Even in philosophy, you know that we cannot depend on fragments, because even how do you know about the fragment if you have not an idea about the whole? So fragment comes with an idea of the whole. So whole is not being reached, so we are talking about fragments. But that does not mean whole does not exist. So that is very important. We will come to that question later on. And meanings, I will say that there are various kinds of, particularly linguistic meanings, but we should not go, and cultural history is becoming more and more important. But that does not mean all history is the history of mind. That is to say, culture and social structure, economic change has no importance. We recognize the importance of culture, but in addition to the social and economic change, and not strictly culture for the culture's sake. So that is very important. And interpretation, of course, we are prone to different kind of interpretation. We can say something about Romila Thapar can say something about Ashoka. Somebody else can say something else about Ashoka. But at the same time, we should remember that we cannot go to that extent that, for example, Ashoka did not preach non-violence. We cannot say that. Or, for example, we can dispute, we can disagree about Gandhi, but on many of his activities, but we just cannot say that Gandhi was responsible for partition of India, because then we make very major mistakes of facts. So there are certain facts which we have to recognize, and as a disciplinary person of history, as a teacher of history at various levels, we should remember this. And whenever such questions come, for example, that it is completely negated, then we have to resist that. Where is the fact? In facts, you cannot say. Actually, as I told you, you cannot say that Battle of Plassey has no importance in explaining the revolt of 1857. Because in between there are 100 years. This 100 years is not a figment of imagination. It is there. It is a fact. We can make different interpretation of this 100 years, but we cannot de-recognize this 100 years. So we have no liberty to say, for example, that Battle of Plassey took place after the revolt of 1857. So we are limited by fact here. So this is very important. So now, as history is a concrete subject, and as I have, you know that we have started around 3:15, so I will finish within another 15 minutes, and then we have some discussion, so that by 4:30 that this thing, entire thing is ends. So now, since history is a concrete subject, and we have to teach history for all, we have to see that how some of the concrete subjects can be handled by the teachers, and when in the classroom, and when doing that, it may be the level, the level of discourse in the classroom will depend on which classes we are teaching. Indeed, the entire story of Ramayana can be summed up in 5 sentences, and it can be expanded in 7 chapters of Ramayana. So there are both possibilities. So it all depends on which classes you are teaching. Which classes you are teaching. Anyway, so since history is a concrete subject, I will take certain illustrative cases. And within these illustrative cases, I will see how question of fact, how there are certain questions of meanings, and how there are certain questions of interpretation. But in spite of all these things, there are certain aspects of the overriding importance of history teaching. Now take, for example, one particular example of the beginning of nationalism in India. Now, we know that there is a debate that whether the revolt of 1857 was the first war of independence or not. You know, Savarkar actually wrote in that way, though Savarkar later on actually did so many other things, but as far as his writing on the 1857 revolt is concerned, has been more or less supported both by Jawaharlal Nehru and Mahatma Gandhi to an extent, as far as 1857 is concerned. Now, this war of independence and the formalized political party, Indian National Congress, 1885, etc., etc. So in between 1857 and 1885, there are so many things happened. And also, there is a question of the nationhood of India, whether it is the product of an administrative Pax Britannica, or whether it is the product of certain other kind of reaction of this Pax Britannica, in which narrow personal interest also worked, as Anil Sil once upon a time told us. Or, as now some of the people are saying, that, well, the political unification of India, administrative unification of India in British rule, though there are various dissidents, various revolts against it also, various protests against it also. But at the same time, the cultural question, for example, there is a long drawn out story of the cultural unity of India because of the pilgrims, because of certain kinds of movement of people from one place to another, because of certain kind of transfer of texts, for example, from one place to another, in the way, and also the learning. Whether we talk about Sanskrit or Tamil or Prakrit, whatever it may be, or Pali, whatever it may be, they have certain unifying role. And this all predated British rule. And even before predated British rule, political unification was also done to an extent by the Mughal rule, the Sultans, Maurya Empire, all from the Maurya Empire onwards, gradually, on certain pockets of India. Gradually it took place. So, this birth of Indian nationhood, whether we should see it merely from the political point of view only, or from the social point of view only, or from the cultural point of view only, that will give us a vista of how long drawn out our searches would be. So this is one question in which, again, we shall come of all these three questions: fact, meanings, and interpretation. With regard to the economic development, you know that this question of India, this question was a very, very important question in the 19th century. Theodore Morrison and Dadabhai Nauroji actually debated over this. But in the 20th century, in the 1960s, Maurice de Maurice raised this question again, and the three other professors, Toru Matsui from Japan, Bipan Chandra from Delhi. At that time, he was not teaching in JNU, he was teaching in Hindu College, and when he wrote this thing, and of course, Tapan Rai Chaudhary, who was teaching at that time in Delhi School of Economics. So they actually questioned some of these postulation, and this postulation was about fact, this postulation was about meaning, this postulation was about interpretation. Now, what was that? Maurice de Maurice says that take the year 1800. By 1800, we just cannot say India was developed. So India was fairly around 1800. That was one of his proposition. And the second proposition was this 150 years of British rule from 1800 to 1947-50. This 150 to 50 years was not a very long period. So if India progressed in a limited way, we should not accuse the British rule for this. Now, and of course, deindustrialization. With regard to deindustrialization, Maurice also stated that, well, we were lost, but at the same time, the handloom sector improved because of the low prices of the threads, spinning, because of the industrial revolution in England. Now, all these questions, as fact, as meanings, as documents, as interpretation, have been questioned by these three doctors, these three professors. One of them, of course, for example, take Bipan Chandra. Bipan Chandra said actually, well, in the way the cotton industry, the cotton weaving industry suffered, in the same way the spinning industry did not benefit. So the loss and gain cannot be compared. And Tapan Rai Chaudhary made two very important statements. One is this, that 1800 was not underdevelopment for India in the global standard. So Maurice is wrong. And second is the point that 150 years is not a very short period of gestation. A child is born after 10 months of gestation in mother's womb. And a country gets its takeoff after 20, 30, 40, 50 years. England got its takeoff in 20 years according to W.W. Rostow. And some other countries actually got it 50, 40, even 100 years. So 150 years is a long time. So that long time cannot be stated a very short time. And Toru Matsui made this statement that you see that there are various aspects of it. One is that that India declined, economically declined because of British rule. Second is India did not decline so much because of its resistance in the social level. It could not be that devastating, etc. So there are various propositions he made, and he said that Maurice cannot be taken generally. So in other words, question of underdevelopment of India during British rule was discussed, and in this discussion, of course, this fact and the interpretation will come time and again. Take another example of the modern Indian history, that is the very close relationship between the poverty, scarcity, and famine. You know that in the 19th century, there are so many famines in India. But what is the exact symptoms of famine? When does scarcity become a famine? And what is the relationship between ordinary poverty and scarcity? So these questions were discussed, and when we were preparing the documents on economic history and quality of life, myself and Professor Amiya Kumar Bakchi, and we have published already 9 volumes. So we have found, and 3 volumes are coming. We have found that these have been discussed in a very threadbare way. Even some of the discussion is so deep in the 19th century that we generally say that Amartya Sen was one of the person who while discussing the Bengal famine of 1943, he stated that is the entitlement question which has become most important while explaining the poverty, while explaining the it is not, it did not happen because of the supply factor. It did happen because of the demand factor. He said this. And entitlement question was actually, actually he highlighted. But this question was discussed even in the 19th century. Indeed, Ashok Mitra, when he criticized Amartya Sen's book in EPW, he was saying this thing that what is new in the book, except that certain new jargon, etc., etc. I'm not actually saying the same thing, but I'm saying that the basic documents were there even in the 19th century. These were not articulated in the way as Professor Shen did it in 1985 when 84 when he wrote that Bengal famine 43 in addition to some other famines throughout the world. So that is very important. But this relationship becoming a very interesting thing. Now, the peasant villages and the forest villages. You know that famine did come and famine made havoc in the southern India volumes. We have shown that, for example, you know the famine commission was appointed in 1880. But before that, the great southern Indian famine of 1878, 76, 78. And before that also Bengal famine, Bihar famine, and other famines took place. And you know that, and the government for the first time tried to do the relief work, etc., etc., etc. And there the question that how much relief was required, how much actually a person needs for his nutrition. That was a great debate between the sanitary practitioners and the doctors of the British rule. So that discussion was there. That discussion was there. That how much famine relief was required. And you know that there are stories. Even these anecdotes are, these stories are very important because history at the end of the day is a story, is a narrative. There are stories that a person who came in the Bihar relief camp and took food and died because he was hungry for so many days. After so many days of hunger, if you take food, you may die. So you may die because you did not get food. You may die because you did get food. That is very important. And so these questions were important. And but you know that in the forest villages, people did not die in that way, particularly prior to 1870, because of the fact that you know that this reserve forest and protected forest were not established in a big way before the 1870s, 80s. So the forest dwellers have scope to have different kind of forest fruits, and they have access to forest products. And this access was gradually taken away. And when these access was gradually taken away in the name of reserve forest and protected forest, then more and more people die, even in the forests. So these are the questions which we can link from some event, some meanings, and some interpretation. Take the example of another question, the women question, for example. It's a very important question, and in the entire story of social reform in India from the 19th to the 20th century, you will find that women becoming very much important. Take the example of Soti, there is the question of women. Take the example of widow remarriage movement, Vidyasagar or Viresalingam, the women were involved. Take the question of the age of consent bill, 1892, Tilak and other people were there, and it is also women. And take the question of the age of marriage, Sardar Act, etc., is also the question of women. So the women question, and of course, women's education was there, and this question, and women's literacy was there, women's writing was there, this question, and women's empowerment was there, as actually nowadays the political scientists, sociologists are saying about women's empowerment. Now the question is this here. Now, when the feminism was born, a very important question of agency came in. That under whose agency certain changes took place in the life of women. Of course, in the case of Soti, it was Ram Mohan Rai. He was a men. In the case of widow remarriage, it was either Ishachandra Vidyasagar or Viresalingam, he was a man. There are other questions in the age of consent bill or Sarda Act, etc., etc. But you know that women also started talking about their life, about their emancipation, about their destiny, about their literacy, about their desires, gradually from the late 19th to the 20th century. Now the question is this, that if some changes do take place as a result of men's agency, can it be completely negated from the feminist point of view? Or, of course, if certain changes took place from the agency of women, can it be disputed by the general history of people? Like for example, as Partha Chatterjee has questioned that, that within nationalism, even within Gandhian nationalism, where women are participating, women have one story as far as nationalism is concerned, and another story as far as they themselves are concerned. Similarly, in the case of Dalit women, Dalit struggle and Dalit women's struggle may not be going in the same direction. Sometimes they may be together, but sometimes they may go apart. So these questions are there. And here again, the fact, meanings, and interpretation will come in. Take the age-old discussion in Natalie Davis. Natalie Davis, who became the second American woman to be the president of American Historical Association. Now, Natalie Davis wrote that famous book, I think in 1984, The Return of Martin Guerre. You know, Martin Guerre returned in the 14th century in his village, and his wife did not recognize him. As a result, as the husband, as a result, the court case started, and Martin Guerre, The Return of Martin Guerre is very, very popular thing. A film has also been made on this. What happened? That ultimately Martin Guerre's wife was defeated and punished. But in the courtroom, the kind of evidence that Martin Guerre placed, Natalie Davis said that this is genuine feminist grievances. So when the book was reviewed in the American Historical Association's journal, American Historical Review, it stated that how can a person become a feminist if feminism? Natalie Davis replied that it is possible. Now this is a question. This question can be discussed. So even before the birth of some idea, something can come in a different form. For example, even in the mythological story or in the Mahabharata story, how Draupadi reacted against the male domination in that famous meeting. It was also certain kind of feminist voice you will find there, but feminism was not born at that time. So, in the strict sense of the term. So, these are the questions with regard to feminism, or even for example, you know, the caste question, which has become a very, very important question. And Gandhi and Ambedkar had very, very different views on caste question, but they have very many similarities also. You know that ultimately, at the end of the day, Gandhi also spoke for the abolition of caste, finally, over a long period. But Ambedkar spoke about annihilation of caste. And this happened because of the different kind of personal experiences also. You know, the Ambedkar was one of the most educated men of modern India. I sometimes tell that in terms of strict qualification, his qualification probably is higher than both Nehru and Gandhi and Subhash Bose, because he was the Bharat Law from UK. He was the PhD from Columbia. He was a DSc from London School of Economics. So all these things he had, but he was suffering here even for staying in Baroda, even after returning. And Gandhi also faced this kind of thing, certain kind of discrimination in Patna. When he went to Champaran, he had to use different toilet. But he thought that my task is now to a different one. I will not discuss this matter at this moment. this happened because they have two different kind of personal experience. If the counterfactual is this, that if Ambedkar was, for example, appreciated in a big way after his return from foreign countries, after so many accolades that he got, the history can be different. Because you know that we cannot talk about counterfactual, but this happened because of the personal experience was so devastating. You cannot go out of it because of this. And even as a result, Ambedkar said once upon a time that the main problem about is this, that before you become a Hindu, you belong to a caste. It cannot be the other way, that first you become a Hindu and then you belong to a caste. No, before you belong to Hinduism, you belong to a caste. And as a result, if you look from that point of view, Gandhi, who was initially a tacit supporter of Varnashram, later on he said that this is not a fundamental feature of Hinduism. It is not a fundamental feature. It is a very, very important statement. So there are certain similarities between Gandhi and Ambedkar, though there are many, many distinct differences and very important differences. And finally, I will end by saying this, that you know that we have discussed the entire course of how the freedom struggle, how freedom struggle, history of freedom struggle we discuss. Even today, 15th August is coming very soon. We just cannot deny the importance of our freedom struggle. And this freedom struggle can be located in the distinct context of British rule in India. And British rule can be, how long was British rule? That is another very important question. You know, when I was interviewed by Ashin Das Gupta for Vishwabharati Shanti Niketan, he asked me that if you're teaching modern Indian history, when you do start? I said, if I start 1757, what is wrong in it? He said, no, it is only Bengal. Then I said that I will start at 1765, the grant of Diwani. He said it is only three provinces. Then he added, what about 1803, when Delhi was captured, because Delhi is the symbol. Then I said that, well, what about 1818, when actually the greatest challenge, the Maratha Confederacy, was vanquished and British paramountcy was established. And even after that, 1848 was there, Punjab, and finally the annexation of Awadh. So it is a long drawn out story from 1757 to 1856. And British rule was gradually established. And this Indian nationalism, the context of Indian nationalism, direct context was, of course, this British rule, definitely. And when all communities actually work together for some time on certain issues at different points of time. Now, this has been looked at very differently when it was going on. And now 72 years after India's attainment of freedom, we can look at it anew. And you know that the question of community, the question of other, not only the middle class politicians, but also the peasants, laborers, all those people, subalterns, are becoming more and more important. The women question, the Dalit question, all these things together. So if we take a panoramic view of all actors in this great struggle, the so-called freedom struggle of India, how can you look at it? There may be various angles of it, and it is not merely that a blind person seeing an elephant, that someone touching his trunk, someone touching his belly, someone touching his feet. It's not like that, but there are various angles to it. So whenever we do history teaching, we should say that there are certain differences, there are certain angles, actually, and we should remember of those angles. A person who is standing on the street, and a person who is standing on the balcony of the 3rd floor, their viewpoint is not the same. And there is a classic Hajjah story regarding it. You know that Mullah Nasiruddin was standing on the balcony of the 3rd floor, and a beggar told him that please come down, sir. So Mullah Nasiruddin said, You tell me, no, you calm down, sir. Then Mullah Nasiruddin came down, and then the person said that, please help me. Then Mullah Nasiruddin said, please come with me. And he took him on the third floor and then said, I am helpless. I will not be able to help. Then the person said that, why did you not say in the ground floor? I said that, why you brought me on the ground floor? So there is a different angles of view, whether you are staying in the ground floor or in the third floor, that you cannot. So angles vary. We should recognize this. Recognize this. Whenever, for example, certain kind of attainment was possible, at the same time, but another kind of attainment may not be possible at the same time. So we should remember all these things, and if we look at it, and if we try to make actually history teaching structured in such a way that we'll try to give them the latest knowledge, but in the most interesting way, and telling them that it is possible that this is a kind of teaching that I have made, but you can look at it differently also. And these are the possibilities. But there, you cannot dispute certain facts, and you cannot extend certain meanings beyond a point, and you cannot interpret in such a way that the fact and meanings would be negative. So in all these things, I think that I may end here. It's now 4:14, and 15 minutes we can discuss. So thank you very much.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you, Professor Arun. Thank you, Professor Bandyopadhyay. What a presentation. Quite mesmerizing and absorbing too. In fact, Professor Bandyopadhyay has dealt with almost all the angles. He has covered every aspect in the colonial phase, and starting from making history meaningful, thinking about the idea of making history meaningful, and trying to look for a form of history teaching for all concerned, and I think for all unconcerned also. In fact, he was talking about chronology, space, persons, and also making the data meaningful. And Professor added date of publication in the E.H. Kaash prescription of title of book and author. He had added date of publication because that is very much important, and it says a lot about the researchers, a lot about the mentality of the person who has recorded it, and tell us about a lot regarding the explanation, exploration, and interpretation of the fact at a particular point of time. While discussing about pedagogy, he is very much particular about the receiver of the lecture. So he says it is important to know the receiver, and then the teaching on graded scale can be made possible, can be adopted to make the pedagogy more incisive and attractive. Because if the receiver is not matured and you are giving it a very high, highly, incisive facts, highly loaded with various facts and ideas, he or she may not be able to grasp it. Next, Professor talks about facts, meanings, and interpretation. He has dealt with the idea, the birth of an idea, and very rightly he took the position that even before birth of some idea, something may come, and it is really wonderful to know it and try to decipher it. Here, I think it's my humble suggestion, humble submission before Professor, that can we at the present time think of interdisciplinary approach, that is interconnectedness, which should be undertaken for further exploration or examination and explanation. I think it would help us to make the subject, as you say, make the subject history a complete subject, so that everything can be encompassed within its purview. So these are the observations which I could get. And there is one query which I am just putting forward before Professor. One is, how should a teacher develop the skill of multiple perspective in the students? Professor Bandyopadhyay, there is a query. How should a teacher develop the skill of multiple perspective?
Yeah. So thank you, Dr. Kumar, for making certain very pertinent comments. Actually, I have tried in my modest way mixed my understanding of history while in my long teaching career as well as my research career. And these are certain findings and these are certain presentations, which is humble presentations of mine. And this may be discussed and commented and critically appreciated also. Professor actually made two pertinent points. One is how before the birth of an idea, whether before the birth of an idea, such kind of expression relating to that idea be made or not, can be possible or not. A very, very interesting question. And the second important question is this, that how teacher would make the multiple angles intelligible and comprehensible to a student, multiple angles of history. So I will answer the second question first. You know that this is also learned from my teacher, Oshin Dasgupta, and which also I had an occasion of meeting Oshin Dasgupta's teacher, Professor N.K. Sinha. Professor N.K. Sinha. Oshin Dasgupta used to ask a question, Bahadur Shah, how to tackle 57 scenario. Now, Sinha later on, before his death, in the third economic history of Bengal, that at the end of his life, he found that counterfactual has no place in history. Here, I think that there is a thing that, you know, the counterfactual, the thing which has not happened in history, which could happen. You know that many times we did discuss counterfactuals. If India did not become partition, what could happen? Now, this is a counterfactual question. The fact that India became partition, only fact. I used to tell my students that when I was teaching a class, I used to say that you can have various factuals that this class is very much boring, in a park, in a cinema hall, or elsewhere in a restaurant. But remember that you save healthy here, but going to the restaurant or park or cinema hall, you may involve in an accident. Nobody knows. So the only fact is this, that you are in this class. So the only fact is this, that partition of India did take place. The 1857 took. Only fact is this, certainly thing. But in terms of analogy, if you are Bahadur, what would you do? That was actually very helpful, because you may counterfactual, you may have an idea of various kinds of angles, though it is not the reality. You may criticize a particular leader, whether it is Nehru or Gandhi or Jim, whatever person, etc. Now, if that person, how to tackle it? So then you will find that what real angle that you have. So in order to get really counterfactual, that which had not happened, analogical query, etc. These are told you, Parthu Chatterjee, that is Dalit recognizes that he is at the lowest. So from the lowest to the highest, what kind of viewpoint? From the highest to the lowest, even if the highest, the person who is on the high, his main is his mind. So angles are actually possible by doing some exercises. It may be not strictly historical exercises, pedagogic exercises, counterfactual exercises, analytic exercises. Your mind will be sharp, and you may be amenable to various other kind of angles. And regarding the first question, I think actually when you say that feminism, for example, when was feminism born? You can date one particular literature, Simon Babaya or Sartre's wife or something like that, etc., etc. But the fact is this, it is the product of a long cultural understanding, and that actually on the basis of certain feelings, certain sentiments, certain statements, which is a long drawn out process. So in that sense, a particular idea is rooted in the long past. So as a result, it is possible that before the birth of an idea, something may happen. Something may happen similar to that idea. So these are actually my modest answers to these very interesting questions. And I hope that some other questions may come later on. And it may come even after Manjuri's presentation. I will be there. At the end of the two presentation also, I think she will also speak more pertinent comments and observations on teaching. So some more important question would come in. So as a result, that can also be discussed at that time. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Bandyopadhyay. Thank you very much for the much needed elaboration and insight of the queries. And you said, if history is to be a structured, latest knowledge in interesting way should be incorporated. Also differently, so that, and one more thing, that they should not disrupt the fact, but make it interesting and absorbing, so that people can come and students will find it interesting. And with this, I move on to the next speaker, who is Professor Manjari Kamath, and who will be speaking on teaching and learning in virtual world, that is making it interesting in some different way, and imparting knowledge in interesting ways in virtual world, how it is being used. So Manjari Kamath will be presenting her paper in the next, just afterwards. And let me have some words about Dr. Manjari Kamath. Dr. Manjari Kamath is a professor at the Department of History, University of Mumbai, and Associate Dean of the Faculty of Humanities, University of Mumbai. She was also formerly head of the Department of History of the University of Mumbai. Her area of specialization is modern Indian history, and her research interests include urban history and heritage, history of labor, and history of medicine. She was awarded the Cambridge Commonwealth Scholarship to pursue doctoral studies at the University of Cambridge, and is a fellow of the Cambridge Commonwealth Society. Dr. Kamath is editor of Mumbai Past and Present, and she had been editor of Mumbai Kal Ani Aaj, Aitihasik Akalan Ani Samkalin Ahwan. She has co-edited Bombay Before Mumbai, essays in honor of Jim Maslows, and she has published a number of articles in national and international journals, including Modern Asian Studies, Economic and Political Weekly, Social Scientist, Indian Historical Review, Indica, and also contributed chapters to different various edited books. Her paper was awarded the Professor B.B. Chaudhary Prize at the Indian History Congress in 2006. She has co-edited with M.D. David the souvenir of the 73rd session of the Indian History Congress, which was held at University of Mumbai in 2012. Dr. Kamath is a member of Academic Council of various universities, and she has been appointed champion of the Association of Commonwealth Universities, London. So now for the next presentation, Professor Manjari Kamath, I think, is ready with her presentation, and I request her to please take over from here. Professor Manjari Kamath, please. Hello.
Can you hear now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
So
Professor
thank you. Yes. Thank you, Dr. Mukesh Kumar, for that introduction, and good afternoon to you all. Today is the 5th day of the Faculty Development Program of the Kaash Foundation, Center for Academic and Professional Development, which has been organized in collaboration with University of Ottawa, Canada, and the St. Xavier's Institute of Education, Mumbai. To begin with, I would like to congratulate the organizers of this very important program, and at such a pertinent time, on the theme of pedagogy of teaching history. I take this opportunity to thank Dr. Avkash Jadhav, Professor Anne Validi, Dr. Susama Samuel, and our coordinators, Professor Elvina Pereira and Dr. Geeta Ajit. I'm honored that this particular session is chaired by Dr. Mukesh Kumar, and it's a privilege to share this day's proceedings with Dr. Arun Bandopadhyay, our former Dean of Arts from University of Calcutta. As Professor Bandopadhyay said, after my session, it would be nice if there are questions which are addressed to both of us so that we can have a lively interaction. The subject of my talk today is Creative Pasts, Learning in a Teaching and Learning in a Virtual World. Today, as I'm talking to all of you, a lot of things have changed in the world in a matter of a couple of months. Had I been speaking to you even 6 months earlier, many of the things I would have shared with you would have been different, and we still are grappling with the fact as to how rapidly the surroundings and the world has changed around us. So what I'm going to do this afternoon in this 1 hour, slightly more than 1 hour, but I'll try to wind up in that period so that we can have the discussion, that I've divided this session in the introductory part, or the first part of the session. I'll talk about the current context. The current context is a COVID-19 and a post-COVID-19 world. And the main objectives of the faculty development program, as I was going through, is basically what we can, all of us are teachers of history. What can we do in this situation to make the subject more interesting? Because as the keynote or the theme note says, to an extent, the perception about history is such that it is much, much underestimated by people, by other subjects and in general. So what can all of us as teachers do with regard to the standing of our subject, which, as rightly Dr. Mukesh Kumar and Dr. Bandyopadhyay said, is connected. Our subject, like no other, is connected to the economy, to society, to politics, to science, you name it. So why is it that the status of the subject is what it has been, and what we can do is something I would like to address. And secondly, in what is called the new normal, which has become like a cliche today, but in this post-COVID world, what we can do with the aid of technology to offer to our students various approaches which have not been explored before, and how can we improve our professional competencies as well as the digital competencies, because in today's world there is no other option, that blended learning is here to stay. So I'll speak a little bit about the context in which we are operating in a general way as as educators, before coming to the pedagogy and the theme, the particular theme of pedagogy of teaching history, and what we can do in terms of teaching and learning in a virtual world. After the news of a new coronavirus, initially, I think none of us were certain as to how long it would last, how long the lockdown would last, and how our lives, both professional and personal, would change. So, over the months from March, as we came into April, May, and as we came into what would have been the beginning of the new academic year in June, but how that also got postponed, we realized that we have to make use of technology and new online forums in order to change the way in which we teach, learn our subject of history. What we observe has happened not just in India but around the world is that there has been a paradigm shift. The whole model has slightly shifted, and that has had a huge impact on pedagogy. And in the months to come, I think there'll be more which will be discussed and written about. But as I speak here today, I think all of us are aware that there has been a radical or a phenomenal shift in the way that learning, teaching is delivered, and the way students are learning. Some of my initial reflections as belonging to the field of education in a very broad and general sense are as follows. The first thing which I think has changed is that it has gradually become a world without boundaries. What we find is that we are in a very big way connected to different parts of India, but also to the different parts of the world in a way in which we were not. Yes, technology was there, but many of the things we had not explored. It was on our to-do list, or was all on the to-do list of even the different universities. But now the first change is that the connection, which is ironic, because on one hand there has been a physical distancing and we are all in our homes or operating from our homes, living and working from home. But at the same time, our connection with the world has changed. We have come closer to the world, and therefore I call it that slowly the boundaries are disappearing. It's a world without boundaries. In the same theme, I would like to add in the first point which I'm making today, that to an extent, this divide between the South and the North is also gradually melting. There is also talk, I'm actively in touch with Association of Commonwealth Universities, which includes many universities across the Commonwealth. So there is also talk of a kind of decolonial, decolonizing of education, how education and the divide between the South and the North is kind of decreasing. The second point I would like to make here is that now we are no longer, even today, and also in our classrooms have shifted from the conventional classroom with concrete walls and doors and windows and whiteboards and blackboards to a virtual classroom. And we have yet to realize, we gradually are, that our classrooms have suddenly expanded. So from, like for example, myself teaching in the University Kalina campus, I suddenly find that my classroom is now a virtual classroom, which might also include, family members who may be listening to what we are saying. And if we want, just by giving a link, we can include students or even teachers like we are doing today from different parts of the country. So the classroom has expanded into a virtual classroom. So what is happening, what I'm trying to say in point number 2 is blended learning. So in blended learning, gradually in the months to come, we will have face-to-face learning, but that will be along with what is called online learning. So hybrid learning is here to stay, and it's fast forwarded because of the coronavirus crisis. So, in the second point, I would also like to stress that in our classrooms, we are increasingly going to have what we described as mature students. So, there won't be students just of a particular age group. So, for example, Professor Jadhav knew that in his classes at St. Xavier's, there were students who were undergraduates of a particular age group, or in my classes in PG, I know that they are 20, to 22-year-olds. But I find that gradually we will have students across the age groups. That there were, I'm not saying there weren't, there were certain students even in their 60s who used to take admissions in our PG degree programs. But increasingly, I think we will have more students in that age group who are professionals, but who also feel that yes, they can now easily from their homes or from their offices devote some time through the laptop or through the mobile to this education. The third thing, in a very general way, I would like to stress today is that there was a kind of rural urban divide. So even in the jurisdiction of our university, which is scattered along the western coast right till the borders of Goa, and yes, we were in touch with our colleagues. Yes, we used to meet at workshops and seminars. But increasingly, I'm finding, and Professor Jadhav can bear me out because we've recently had, two major programs, one on e-content and the other to commemorate Lokmanya Tilak's, centennial death anniversary. So increasingly, we find we are all coming together in a way that we weren't earlier, frequently, and there is more academic exchange. So various districts in the Konkan, which are in the jurisdiction of our university, and we are holding hands to face this new challenge and trying to see what we as teachers can do to develop e-content and innovative pedagogical methodology. So that itself is a big kind of change. And connected with that third point of the decreasing rural urban divide is the language barrier. So far, there was a hidden underlying language difference, that there were some students who were mainly speaking, writing examinations in Marathi, some in Hindi, some in Gujarati. I now speak mainly from the Western India perspective, but Professor Bandyopadhyay can bear me out. In Bengal, it would be like Bengali and other languages with English. But now, with this new forums which are available, in a matter of seconds, you have English which can be translated by technology into whichever other language it can be translated into. And as I speak, also the computer is able to on the screen have whatever I'm saying right there, for us. So I'm talking in future for our students. So that itself, I think, is a major shift in terms of the geographical distance or space is suddenly we find, not that distant. So our colleagues in Konkan are not that distant anymore. I don't have to think, oh, so I'm going to meet my colleague from Natu College in Chiploon only at that particular workshop after 3 months. No, if I want, we can together be a part of a panel or of an e-content group or even for a webinar. So that is as far as, the third aspect of the broader changes in education post-COVID. And the last change, of course, there are many others, but these are the four things I would like to highlight in the beginning of my talk, is social media. Now, many of us, and especially our students, are very familiar with the different social media. Some people like me were hesitating, but in recent times had kind of, had a Facebook account and so on. But the fourth major change is that the social media is also going to play or is playing a major role in teaching and learning and the delivery of education. So whether it is Facebook, whether it is Instagram, whether it is Twitter, they are all here to help us in this, as teachers and as students. They are aids or technological aids which are there, where there are no limits, where we can have, and for example YouTube also, as sort of other kinds of forum. So webinars like this, which or FDPs like this, organized by the Kaash Foundation with Xavier's Institute and University of Ottawa, are able to kind of use these social media to reach to much bigger or much wider audiences of teachers, or in the coming days of students, in a way which one had not explored before. And I think that is a good thing, because that's also leading to a democratization of teaching and learning, where it is accessible to any corner of the world. I can just go on that YouTube and listen to a lecture, or listen to and watch a particular program. As we are speaking, we know that there is a major conclave of the UGC and the MHRD which is going on how education is being transformed and about the new education policy. So it is because of this media that there are so many viewers. As I tuned into it in the morning, I found, the viewers are in lakhs who are going to watch these programs. And again, allied to this fourth point are the new, particularly for the teachers who are here with us today as participants. Many of us have been part of faculty development programs where we are being taught how to use online platforms. So whether it is Zoom, or the Google Classroom and Google Meet, or WebEx, which we are using today, or the Moodle learning management systems, we find that the sky is the limit. That it is like called the Zoom cloud. So essentially, there are various online platforms available to us, which is again going to alter or have an impact on the pedagogy of teaching in general, and particularly, as I will come to very quickly, on the pedagogy of teaching history. And I would also like to say, in the end of the first part of the my presentation, which is mainly looking at the ecosystem in which we are operating today, which is as a result of the global public health crisis. And the last point I would like to stress in this first template is that while on one hand it is a difficult situation, and I think there is no disputing the fact that yes, we are living and working in a difficult scenario where many of our colleagues, some students or family members are being affected, and all of us are taking precautions as well. But while it is a difficult situation, we are also finding that there are more new doors which are opening to us. And this is a time also for all of us to do hand holding, which is precisely what we are doing in this faculty development program, because at the end of the day, I'm a teacher and I have as much to learn from all of you, is that we have to utilize this, this scenario which is in front of us, whether we like it or not, it is there. We don't have an option. Well, efforts are being made, and We hope that very soon we will be coming out of this difficult situation. But at the same time, here is an opportunity for enriching the scope of education and for enriching the pedagogy of teaching, learning, and of teaching history. So I will come to that part now, which is the main theme of what I want to speak about. But before I go to that, there is also another development which I think we cannot ignore. So along with this COVID and how it is changing the delivery of education and teaching learning, the other side of the coin is the new education policy. Now we have to have this context in front of us as we develop new pedagogies of teaching history, because it is going to impact the pedagogy of teaching history. And most of you may have read about the new education policy, but some of the markers or some of the important sort of changes which are going to happen, which will impact all of us as history teachers, is one, and I think Professor Mukesh Kumar spoke about it, and so did Professor Bandyopadhyay, is interdisciplinarity. So while all of us are historians and history teachers, gradually we also have to look at models of teaching or pedagogies which are interdisciplinary in its approach. And that is something which we will have to take into consideration, because that is also emphasized in the new education policy. We also know that the undergrad program also going to change. It could be a 4-year program. There is a multiple exit entry which is going to be given to students. The choice-based credit system, the buzzword is interdisciplinarity, choice-based credit system, flexibility. So what was already, in a way, it was already there in the US, and we were adopting it. Our university and autonomous colleges like Xavier's have already adopted the choice-based credit system. But now there is going to be more and more flexibility for the students. We also cannot forget that in our university, there will be affiliated colleges, but more and more colleges will become autonomous. More and more gradually private universities are going to enter this ecosystem, and we all have to be prepared for this, because these are the changes we have to embrace and learn how we can improve ourselves as teachers and our institutions, what they can do in these, to face these challenges. There is a time, I'm also kind of pitching my presentation today, as Professor Jadhav said to me, to kind of look at schools and junior college. So what I'm going to talk about today is not just about postgraduate education, but mostly it is to do with what we as teachers can do at the foundation period, which is school, junior college, and undergrad, which is the bachelor's degree program, and particularly our subject of history. The MPhil may not be there now, so this is something which we have to take into consideration, and also language and the kind of choice which has been given at the primary level. So with this context of COVID and what that means in terms of the online teaching or blended. So as the months pass by and as things become safe, it will be blended learning, but online teaching learning is here to stay. So there will be face to face as well as that. So that, and the second part in the context is the NEP, which I think we have to take, bear in mind. Now coming to essentially the pedagogy of teaching history, and I think there's more we can discuss in the interaction or the question answers as to what are the new methods we can use. But in this part of my presentation, what I would like to do is talk mainly about 4 templates, and whatever I will speak or examples I will give are, relating to these 4 templates, so that it becomes easier for us to see what are the new changes we can introduce. And then you can also share with Professor Bandopadhyay and me what you all are already doing in your classrooms. So in terms of teaching history particularly, and here is an opportunity to really think hard about how we can change the standing which history has. And particularly in our university, there are 4 faculties. So one, there is humanities. So as Dr. Mukesh Kumar, Dr. Bandopadhyay said, Dr. Bandopadhyay himself was a dean of arts. So our history comes in humanities, but within that, the social sciences. So that science technology faculty is there. Then you have the commerce and management, and you have the interdisciplinary studies faculty. At least our universities have these 4 faculties. So when I'm going to talk about these 4 templates, what I realized as I was preparing for this presentation is that our pedagogy is, and the various subjects or fields within, which are there in history, which we are all aware of, are basically related to these other subjects or these other what we call faculties. So while we are a social science and we mainly use methodologies of a social science, our subject in very basic and intricate ways is connected with HISTEM, or the science, technology, environment, medicine, but also with other interdisciplinary subjects like music and dance and folk dance and media and education, but also connected with science, public health, and medicine, as well as with the faculty of technology. And Professor Bandopadhyay and me, for us, it's also a research interest. So whether it's environmental history or urban history and modern India, and economic history are fields which also are areas of research interest for the speakers of today, my senior colleague, Professor Bandopadhyay, and me. So what are those 4 templates that we will talk about? The first one is curiosity. How can we develop curiosity in our students and in ourselves to arouse the interest of the student? Because until there is curiosity and unless the student is interested, here I'm talking of school and junior college, but also our undergraduate students, until that happens, I think they don't really get involved in a way which we would like them to. So that's what I'll first speak about. And within within each template, I'll talk about some examples which makes it more clear, which I have used. I will also talk about some of the examples Professor Jadhav has, in his particular college, which I have attended, and I've seen, students being really interested. So curiosity is number 1. Number 2 is activity. Now, recently we find, particularly in the new whether it's IB or you have CBSE and others, teaching learning is more based on activities, on problem solving. Even in new universities like the Azim Premji and all are mainly focused on activity, problem solving, original thinking. So I think that is extremely important. And if we do that at the foundation level in school, junior college and undergraduation, I think that will really enhance the way in which the subject is viewed and the way the subject is taught. Third, of course, is research and innovation. So some of us who are teaching in universities, it's very important to inculcate this, but also inculcate it at the at the level of school and college, to inculcate this right at that stage in terms of research and innovation. And the fourth and the last one, which I think is very important, but about which we don't stress that much, is what is the relevance of our subject. History is not just about the past. I've talked about creative pasts, which means how can we make it meaningful in the contemporary scenario? Because the children, the students we are teaching are, the citizens of tomorrow. I mean, we are, whether we like it or not, playing a very, very big role of grooming young minds. And how do they face the challenges of the world? So the fourth one is what we can do to leverage history for benefiting society, the nation, and the world. But how can we make them, make it relevant in the contemporary scenario, the contemporary situation around us, or in our country, as well as in the world? So that is what, these are the four areas or templates I would like to speak in terms of pedagogy of teaching history, and then I can stop and we can have interaction and a kind of a Q&A. So I think in the next half an hour, or maybe slightly more than that, let us look at these four templates and what we can do as teachers. The first one being curiosity, and how are we going to arouse the interest of the students in history. And we have to again do this in the context, as I say, at the back of our mind is the COVID context, where we have to do all this in the mode of blended learning, so face to face and using technology. So how are we going to do that, and preparing, to be ready for the new education policy? Now, I'm going to base this talk on examples, because otherwise I realize it becomes boring. The other thing I can't stress enough is how do we maintain the attention span, of our students. In at least in the classroom, we can physically see them fidgeting and so on, but in an online classroom, it's very difficult. So even today, I do not want to sort of test your patience more. So, and examples may also help us, to make it more interesting. So, in the first template of curiosity, I would like to give the example which my father just had mentioned many years ago to me, that there was in our family somebody trying to teach mathematics, geometry to a child, and the child could not understand what are parallel lines. Now, this is not a history example, but I'm just showing how what we can do to encourage curiosity and to arouse interest. Now, the child couldn't understand, and many of these concepts in arithmetic, algebra, and geometry even scare many of us history teachers even today. So, what that person did, who was teaching a child in the family, was took a chalk, because here we are talking of many years ago when technology was not there, took a chalk and started drawing a line on the floor of the house, and then took it outside the main door and outside into the passage and the staircase. And the child understood, and two lines were drawn, with a chalk, and the child understood what is the meaning of parallel lines. But this is something which is again the curiosity of the child who couldn't understand. So one way of addressing that curiosity would have been to say, look, parallel line, and explain it in a technical way. But the other is what this person did, was to actually do something innovative at that time in a family situation with hardly any technological tools, so that the child would never forget in life what parallel lines would mean, and neither was the child asked to keep quiet because he was not understanding that particular concept. Another example I would like to give today is of the famous scientist Dr. Jayant Narlikar. Now, we all know that Narlikar has extensively written about science. He's an astrophysicist, and I had the opportunity to hear him in a lecture where he was talking about, he gave an example from Cambridge, where he was a tripos student. The word tripos is the word for the undergrad exam, because a student used to take that exam sitting on a stool with three, which was a tripod. So he gave an example which I would like to sort of give today, in terms of how curiosity is very important, and why is it that certain universities like Cambridge, for example, have the most number of Nobel laureates in the world. Why? What is the reason? Why is a particular university producing those many Nobel laureates? So what is it that the university which is doing is different? Now here we're not just talking of the international rankings, which are of course important in terms of the Tompkins and other the tables, but simple things which Dr. Narlikar tried to explain in that talk which I attended is this, that two examples he gave. One is an example of an exam at Cambridge in which almost the whole class failed excepting for two students. Now, those two students were called by the teachers and asked, because it was a particular theorem that both of them could solve, and only the two of them, not the rest of the class. So one of them was called by the teachers and those who set the paper. And of course, we are not talking of history, but I'm giving these examples again to show how curiosity can, what it does and how to arouse the interest in the students. So those students were called. We seldom do that, to call and sort of ask, how is it that you were able to crack this, these questions when the others couldn't? So that one student said that I had read a journal article where I read how this particular, formula, and this was a recent journal article, and he was patted on the back because normally one doesn't see undergrads reading the latest journal articles. We would expect that for research students, but here was a student who had already done that and was able to answer, this particular question. Then the other student was called and asked, how come you could solve it? And he said, I wrote that journal article. So this kind of struck me in that talk because often, many of us, when we teach, and even I sort of thought that, okay, when I am a PhD student, I will do it. After that, we think, oh, when I submit my thesis, I will write that article. Then we say, oh, but you look at some articles in international journals written by stalwarts in your field, and you think, oh, I haven't reached that stage. So it's always postponing to, a time for the future. But I think this example has shown that you can write and encourage your students to write at any stage. You don't have to wait till you go to university or wait till you become an assistant professor. No. So I think in pedagogy, I would urge teachers in the school level to write for that magazine, to write for the newsletter or whichever journal or newspaper, and the same for college students, because that is extremely important, and which this example also showed that an undergrad student wrote in a journal article. Another example, Professor Jadhav, Avkash Jadhav, me share an interest in labor history. Many years ago, in exactly almost a century ago, we are in 2020, we have one of the senior doyens of the trade union movement in India, Shripad Amrit Dange, who was one of the founding members of the Communist Party of India. Now, he at that age was just 20 or 21 years old. I think he was born in 1899. And he wrote a pamphlet exactly 100 years ago called Gandhi versus Lenin. Now, here was the young Dange who wrote that book, because India, or the national movement here, was at the crossroads. You have 1920, a very important year where the death of Lokmanya Tilak and the gradual coming of Mahatma Gandhi on the horizon as a national leader. But at the same time, youngsters, college students in Mumbai were also affected by the Russian Revolution and by Lenin. So it is amazing as to how a 20 or 21-year-old is writing about the two ideologies at that young age. And today, when I speak to our students, when they write an assignment or when they write a dissertation, often come to me and ask, what is the word limit? How do we go about it? How many books? So many things. And I can't but share this example with them that yes, all these things are important in terms of the guidelines which are laid. But somewhere I think we need to encourage innovation where, as my supervisor, Dr. Rajnaran Chandavarkar, who is no more now, who was at Trinity College, Cambridge, said to me once when I was scared and asking so many similar questions when I was beginning my PhD thesis about how to do it, which books to read, and the methodologies and the footnotes. And he said to me one thing. He said to me, as long as you don't borrow somebody else's ideas and say they are your own, he said, there are no rules. The sky is the limit. Of course, the basic footnotes and, research methodology is taught to us. It's not difficult. But as long as you cite the sources, about those you are consulting, he says, it is, you're free to write. And he even went to the extent where once I was bogged down by his book and how are we going to write when he's written such a masterpiece. And he had the, he generosity, he said, keep my book aside and, start writing your thesis. So I think that is something which I myself learned, and I find it important with my own students, is to encourage curiosity and what they want to write rather than bogging them down with too many rules. As long as they have the basics clear about methodologies in the social sciences and research methodologies, I think we need to, because otherwise, how will the subject go ahead? How will the subject go forward? The other example of Narlikar, which I would like to say here, is that he quoted, a discussion of some examiners at Cambridge where they were discussing about the science teachers or examiners were kind of saying to the economists there, as people, they sit all together at formal hall or the high table and discuss these things. The good thing about that is you're talking to scientists, to to historians, to classicists, which normally happens in colleges, but in the university again we have different departments. So it's extremely important, I think, to drive this point, that it's very important to us, all of you teachers, to as much as possible discuss in the staff room. Of course, when the situation improves, it's not a waste. You need to discuss with the sociology, with the psychology, economics, and those teachers, because there is a lot to learn from these other subjects, and vice versa, except, and also how it is socially enriching. So the other example of Narlikar was this, that the science examiners said to the economists on the table that, I'm observing that from year to year, there isn't that much of a difference in the questions you all are asking in the social sciences. And, so it was a kind of indirect snub to the social sciences to say, look at, our question papers and the way we set it. But the economists who were there, who were setting those papers, what gave a very good reply, and what they said is that in our social sciences, and this applies to history as well, the answers are different. So the answers from student to student may be different. The answers from year to year are different as the different generations. And because the fun of all of us and the social sciences we teach is that there can be many interpretations. We don't have a single interpretation. So I remember the MPhil questions which I have, to me, were new. So when I was asked, which I come to another example in the rubric of curiosity and how to arouse interest, the questions also aroused my curiosity. So the questions we ask in the exam also could be such which are simple but which enable a student to think and write rather than reproduce what they have read in some in a textbook or some reference book. And I think that is something which was a major takeaway for me, because some of one of the questions, just because we are history teachers, was this, that why is it that Pakistan and India both became free around the same time in 1947, but the trajectories after that are different. So while India continued as a democracy for many years, you find three dictatorships there. What, discuss this. So in classroom discussions, having these kind of questions, or in the essays that I wrote, when we are asked, a sentence is given to us that the 18th century was a dark century, was a dark century in Indian history. Discuss. Now, the answer to that could be anything. I could make a case that yes, it was a dark century, and then argue the case, or I could make a case and quote revisionist historians like Christopher Bailey and others to say how it wasn't a dark century, because a lot was happening, and there was economic buoyancy in certain regions of India. So I think what I really learned myself as a student, and what I use in the classrooms here, is to have questions or debates in the class where the answers, there is no one right answer, that you can argue it in different ways. It is scary for our students because they are used to a certain type of questions. But I think that is what I found interesting in the undergraduate sort of question papers there, or even in the questions which were asked during the MPhil exam when it came to subaltern studies. And I would also like to add that in the essay, uh, when I wrote, for example, about the Cambridge School of Historiography, which you all have heard about, I also discussed there and critiqued the collaboration in terms of the Indian elites collaborating. But I went deeper and showed that it wasn't the case, and kind of argued it further. And my examiner for that was Christopher Bailey. Why am I giving these examples? Is I was scared, because if the question paper is being my answer book is being assessed by somebody who was, one of the historians of the Cambridge School, I was taking a risk, because I could have been marked adversely by that particular examiner. But what I found, something which amazed me when I received the answer book, as he had made and I have it with me still today, a pencil tick where I had made where I had critiqued the Cambridge School. So those were the kind of things which, examples I'm giving, which I think we need to inculcate. So, like I have maybe written a book, but tomorrow if in the answer book somebody, or in the essay or thesis, somebody critiques it, then that's okay, because how otherwise is the subject going to move forward? So arguing, analysis, analytical thinking is something we need to encourage right from the school level. And that is why I've quoted or given certain examples to drive home the point. The other example is of curiosity and arousing interest is Professor Avkash Jadav's own kind of example, where World War One, and he had there was a major exhibition in the college on the First World War, and we had students of St. Xavier's College have on display various artifacts, and how the history of World War One was displayed there in the college hall, which was open to all subjects, and our students from the university also went there. So going underground below that stage and hearing, like the sound effects and so on, really made a difference. Just imagine, of course, sir teaching in a classroom Archduke Francis Ferdinand, then how we studied it, like the immediate cause, the Balkan question. Of course, yes, one, the theory is important and the classroom is important, but by doing this and involving the fraternity, us teachers from different parts of Mumbai, I could see the excitement on the students' faces as we were, talking to them and discussing those artifacts. And it also involved physical activity where they had made those particular models. So in the context of the present day, we could have virtual exhibitions, do a similar thing, and use the video, use the audio and podcast to have virtual exhibitions of this particular nature. I think there was a question by one of the participants about multiple perspectives, how to encourage multiple perspectives. So again, under the rubric of curiosity, we can encourage multiple perspectives. And again, I would give the example of St. Xavier's College, where they had a competition of students, which was a what if competition. And I found that very, very interesting. So, for example, often I have thought if Lokmanya Tilak had not died in 1920, what would have happened uh, in Maharashtra and otherwise? I mean, it is important. I, for example, ask my students, why is it that Mahatma Gandhi did not launch the Quit India movement in 1939? World War II began in 1939, but the Quit India movement was not started that year by Mahatma Gandhi. It was started in 1942. There were reasons for that, which we know. But it's important to, kind of give these questions or just sort of put these questions to the classroom, whether it's a virtual classroom, and see the kind of answers you get from the students about these different ifs and buts. And I think, of course, sir did a great job that time when there was a competition. When there were world history events also. What if Pearl Harbor had not happened? What if Hitler had not attacked? The Soviet Union. So the student's interest is aroused. The student is thereby forced to look at the facts, which they may still would have done, but this now in terms of a problem solving. And then if you introduce a competition and have groups in college and give names to those groups, the students are very, very excited. And we got really good presentations by the students of that St. Xavier's College. The next thing under curiosity, which all of us in terms of pedagogy and methodology use, is a quiz. So we in the university, while teaching national movement, have a quiz. We let the students only make the teams, and the students only formulate the questions. Now that is easily possible in the Moodle, on the Moodle platform, or for that matter, any of the platforms, whether it's Zoom and others, where you can have an exciting quiz on any topic, whether it's a world history or topic you all are teaching, or an Indian history, or you're talking about the medieval period or the Anglo-Maratha wars. You can have a quiz in the class, which also will inculcate the students' interest. And lastly, I would say under curiosity is story. Now, often I think storytelling is kind of looked down upon. As children, I think all of us like to listen to stories from our grandmother, from our parents. That is an art which slowly is being thought of as dated, uh, where of course students, the young age parents want to expose the children now to the mobile and nursery rhymes and so on. But I think the art of storytelling and listening, there's a lot in that. You also have patience and learning skills, and yeah, school students, college students would love that. So I think we also need to kind of reinvent storytelling in history, and which is not to say that there won't be analysis, but you can kind of paint two scenarios, that these are the two stories, and then kind of ask the students what will happen afterwards, or what do you think will be the ending, or things like that. So those are kind of ways in which you can encourage curiosity and arouse interest in students. And I'm really looking forward to knowing from all of you in the interactive time that we'll have with each other and with Professor Bandopadhyay, chaired by Professor Mukesh Kumar, about what are the various pedagogies you are using in classroom to encourage curiosity. The second kind of template I want to speak, altogether it's 4, so I won't take much time. I think in the next 15 minutes I will try to wind up. So the next template is that of activity. I find that as you go from school to college and then to university, the actual activity based teaching learning decreases. And I do not know why that happens. And that is something we need to bring back. Now, I know in the context of COVID, the actual physical activity will be difficult, but we can also do that in the virtual mode. Okay, and once we come out of the COVID situation, we can actually intersperse it with physical activity. So what can we do in it activity as a pedagogical tool. Now, many of the world museums have opened, as well as museums in, of course, what I mean here is we already take our students to museums. So here in Mumbai, we have the Bhaudaji Lad Museum, the Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj Vastu Sangralay. We have the RBI numismatic sort of museum. We have a textile museum. We have the BEST museum, and many museums which we can take our students to, which is a very important part of pedagogy. But I would like to emphasize to all my colleagues here, the participants in today's session, that many museums now have what is called virtual museum tours. So while you're using your Zoom and Moodle and other platforms, you can actually live, while you're talking like I'm doing, with you, you can visit do a virtual tour of different museums. So if you're teaching them certain, whether you're teaching them about the Indus Valley civilization, or you're teaching them about, let's say you're teaching them about the Marathas. Now there is a whole gallery of the Maratha armory in the CSMVS museum. If you're teaching them history, culture, heritage of Mumbai, the Bhaudaji Lad Museum has small models and of various communities in Mumbai and things like that. So these are just some different pedagogies you can use in the present context where you can have museum tours. I also, for example, I also found that the Royal Botanical Gardens of Kew in the London, so they are also open now virtually. So the sky is the limit. You can take them on these tours of, you can visit Stonehenge, which was a prehistoric site in the UK, and it's just at the click of the button. You can actually go, and it's as if you're physically going there. So and all these things are very, very simple. By going to those sites, you can do virtual museum tours. You can take them on various, visit archaeological sites in India, and visit certain websites. So I think that is a very important second template of activity based teaching learning, and how to increase more and more activities of your students while making history come alive, by looking at a sword of Shivaji in the sort of CSMVS museum, or by looking at a shawl from the Peshwa period, or a Paithani sari, or going to visiting the Victoria Memorial Hall in Calcutta, where our colleague Professor Jayanto Sengupta is, and maybe also having a talk with him. Why not? Why not? The students can interact with him and various museum directors and curators. In the activity, there are also heritage walks. I can't but emphasize how interesting it is to take the students on heritage walks. That can be done after situation improves, but right now there are many of our students who are offering free, and some of them are paid, virtual heritage walks, where they actually take you to different sites in Mumbai, and for that matter heritage walks in India and at the world level. So those, I think, would be very, very important to in again encouraging template 2, which I'm talking about, and that is activity based teaching learning. The RBI museum is there, where you can actually, when you're talking about numismatics, you can show coins to the students. Or we have our friend in Calcutta, Dr. Mahesh Kalra, who would be really happy to talk to your students and show some coins. Or for that matter, Dr. Shailendra Bhandare from the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford would be very willing to speak about this, as well as take you on a tour of the particular museum. And this is open to us in the present COVID situation. Other activity based methodologies you can use, new pedagogies you can use, is plays, which I use in my classroom, or skit. You can ask a student to actually do a skit or a play. You can enact certain episodes. So, for example, we in 1908 was Tilak's trial, and you have the famous, High Court speech. it is one thing to teach it to the students or read it out. It's quite another to show them the plaque outside the High Court, which actually has Lokmanya Tilak's words, written there, and actually kind of narrating that speech or asking one student to read and enact it. I mean, how wonderful that would be to explain the 1908 sort of High Court speech, and the workers who voluntarily came out of their mills in Mumbai and were away for almost a spontaneous protest of 1 week. Another thing which I use in my MPhil classroom, where I teach about the history and culture of Maharashtra, and one of the topic is cuisine or food, where we, rather than me just teaching about the food of Maharashtra in the MPhil class, we actually have a day when we each bring a kind of a dry snack. So I would get tiratse ladu, somebody else would get poha, another would get puran poli. And by doing that, not only do you learn what is there in the syllabus, but it is a treat for the other students, where we invite students from the foreign policy or other electives whom we welcome in the class, as well as the faculty. So it's also a social event, but while doing the social part, it's also fun to explore the cuisine by actually activity based, which means you actually do something at home. You learn that cuisine, and now many of these cooking videos, I think more and more in the COVID situation, many of us have learned new recipes. So they are all open to us, and we can actually do that, because heritage is something which is not just built heritage, but also intangible heritage. Songs, audio, inactivity based oral history is very important. So when you're giving a particular assignment, do encourage them to take interviews. In the present situation, you can interview people in the classroom, in the family, whether it's the senior citizens and elderly, about a particular event. So, for example, you can talk about the dock explosion. So, I spoke to my father, and he actually narrates that particular event in Mumbai, or what happened, 15th August 1947. So, this is a wonderful time when our students cannot go out, but they can use technology to interview somebody, from their mobiles, or also interview people from family. And that again is an activity based learning sort of model. And of course, last but not least, is the poster, where we have many students from the northeastern part of India in our Department of History, University of Mumbai. So we had one day which was a day when we celebrated the cuisine of the Northeast, when we had a posters in our department about the history of the Northeast. So this is a wonderful thing which even today students are not going to be deterred, because they can still do these posters, from on the online forums, which you can share in class. I come to the penultimate, or the third template which I would like to speak about, and I will stop in about 5 to 10 minutes, and that is research and innovation. Now, many of these themes I'm talking about are interrelated, but I will still like to say about research and innovation. Now, it is very important to have some kind of project or a dissertation. So at the school level, maybe an essay; at undergrad level, maybe an assignment; and as you come to the third year BA, maybe a very small project; and at MA, definitely a dissertation. So I think gradually we find that the writing skills are being kind of eroded. Listening skills, writing skills, everything which a generation ago was automatically inculcated, are gradually we are seeing being eroded in the present generation. So even if it is writing on the tablet or the laptop, it is fine, but do encourage them to do something more than the objective questions and so on. So some essay which they have to write at home, where there is no stress, where there is no tension, oh, that it's an exam. No, so the essays written at home are important. Well, if you're doing cinema history like Professor Jadhav is doing in Xavier's, you can show them or they can watch it, on YouTube or with you in the virtual classroom, and then they can write something on that cinema, depending on the course that they are teaching. So if I'm teaching about urban history of Mumbai, I similarly ask them to do that. So a recent assignment which my students did in class was they interviewed the food vendors in different parts of Mumbai city. So some interviewed food vendors in Goregaon, some outside some colleges, and we came to know a lot about how people's tastes are changing, what is the impact of global cuisines, what is the impact of the new coffee shops on the conventional fast food in Mumbai, and what are the new hybrid kind of cuisines which are emerging. So and that thereby we came to know more about the culture, history, heritage, and food culture of the city. So encourage them to do writing and present it in class. So here is encouraging research and innovation. Family history is a new field in history. As we are talking now, students are spending extended times, and so are we, in our in our homes. Now, while they are at home, encourage them to look at family photographs and write something on family history, or if they have some video clips about local history, and after the COVID situation, to visit lesser known heritage sites in their locality, okay, and write something about it. So webinars in the present context, as the history fraternity, Professor Jadhav, me, Professor Bankara already doing, we are having webinars on e-content. We are having webinars where we are we had speakers, speak about Lokmanya Tilak's and his life on the death centenary. Very soon on Sunday, we will be having Professor Mridula Mukherjee from the JNU speak to us on the August Kranti. Now, August Kranti or the August Quit India movement was launched from Mumbai. So rather than just make it technical, you can actually show them, the Gowalia Tank Maidan, what really happened on that particular day. And there are, you can actually now, through Asiatic Society, the newspapers of those times are available. So you can actually virtually show them the digital copy of newspapers of that time. So what, for example, was the news on the 8th and 9th August 1942 in Mumbai? Show them the newspapers or give that to them as an assignment and see what happens. So here I would also like to end by saying that at a small level, encourage them to see what was called primary sources. My friend Abigail McGowan from University of Vermont says that she's doing that again on a very, very small scale with her students, where she's encouraging them to just look at one newspaper and then write something of that particular period. So suppose she's teaching the interwar years, then they may look at a newspaper of that period. For example, a newspaper about at the time of civil disobedience movement, or any kind of theme or topic that you are doing. And then, so that gives them exposure, even if it's a digital newspaper, to a primary source, without us as intermediaries explaining to them what happened on the morning of 8th August 1942. How were the major Congress leaders arrested on the morning of 9th August 1942? You can actually ask them to look at these digital newspapers. Today is the 75th anniversary of the Hiroshima bombing. Right now, many of us history teachers teach about, I think almost all of us, about the Second World War and about those events. So it is important, on occasions like this, to use these kind of innovative techniques and encourage them to write something about it. Gazetteers are now almost all are digital, and they are available free and online. This way, they come to know the primary sources like digital newspapers, like gazetteers. If you want to do hand holding to begin with, in your virtual, through the Zoom forum, you can share the screen and actually show them the gazetteer or the newspaper, but then give them an assignment. And the same thing as, is about films, which Dr. Jadhav is doing in the cinema course that he teaches, to actually show them Garam Hawa and the films on partition, and that way they learn a lot more, as well as the advertisements, or for example, Lakshman's cartoons tell us so much about the history. So I come to the concluding or the last part of my presentation, and will wind up and conclude in the next 5 minutes. And the last template, which is very important, is the relevance of our subject history, and how we can make our teaching and learning relevant for society, and stress the contemporary relevance, or the importance of history in the contemporary period. And I think it is very, very important that we don't just live in the past and talk about it in the lecture. The students forget about it. We come home, they give the exams, as they go to SYBA, they don't know, or they slowly are, it's erased from their memory, and they go to TVIT, they do the syllabus, they score well, but have not really understood, or the richness of the subject. Because I think we as historians, and that is what I would like to end with, are at a vantage point which is different, I would like to say, from many of our sister social scientists, whether it is sociology, political science, economics, geography, philosophy, psychology, are very rich. But why are we called the mother of social sciences? And apart from the conventional reasons, I think we are at a vantage point, and the kind of insights we have are much more enriching in its own way, because we bring in a different kind of perspective. Let's face it, in our classrooms in future, we are going to have students from different disciplines. There will be students from science in our classroom. There will be students of music. Um, and this is this is going to happen sooner rather than later. So it is very important that in our classroom, when there are economic students, or when there are political science major students and architects who are also taking our classes, to make it relevant, number one, by talking about current events and asking them to go into the history of those events and talk about it. Have a panel in classroom, a panel discussion, or invite somebody, a journalist or somebody, and have 4 students there, and the journalist then does, judges that particular discussion. I would again like to give 2 examples before I end, with regard to relevance for society and its contemporary relevance. Let's take the example of COVID. Now, many of us historians who have studied or researched history of medicine uh, have read about or studied about the plague, the bubonic plague, or have studied, like Professor Mridula Ramanna, the influenza pandemic of 1918. It would be a wonderful exercise, to have an expert talk to them, but also encourage the students to read something about the history of the plague, or to read something, maybe not the book, but maybe an essay written by Mridula Ramanna. She has written a beautiful essay on the influenza pandemic. Give them, circulate that before the class, and then ask them to discuss, and what kind of takeaways it has for us in today's situation, because it was also a global pandemic. In what way are we in a similar situation? In what are the differences? And critically look at those particular events. The same with regard to anniversary is very important, because we have to look back. It helps us to take stock. So the other thing is, for example, whether it is the 75 years of Quit India movement. We had a webinar in the university, but it's the 75th anniversary of the atom bomb at Hiroshima, Nagasaki. It's a time to take stock, because that was a major crisis for the world. And even today, as we talk, and for many, many years, we are aware that there are these there are challenges of a nuclear war in the context today. There is a crisis, there is a there is a public health crisis. So in the past, if our students learn to be aware of what has happened, then I think they learn to be citizens who are aware of and bring a kind of historical perspective to particular events, whether it is foreign policy, whether it is the conflicts, which India has had. Ask them, give them these exercises so that it brings out its sort of contemporary relevance, and it will also help when it comes to our interdisciplinary class, when there will be students from other subjects. I would like to end with an example of an event we did in end of I think end of last year, and that was organized by India Lost and Found, which has been started by a photographer called Amit Pasricha. Now, what he finds is that the young students are not so aware about India's rich built heritage. So, in this particular exercise, what did we do? We had many colleges, including architecture, science students, come together, and 20 lesser known heritage structures were identified in Mumbai, and students were divided into groups. So, for example, Jai Hind College, Xavier's College, JJ College of Architecture, Mulund College of Commerce, maybe I'm just taking random examples, or Patkar College. Students did an exercise where they went to the actual lesser known monument. So here we are talking of, for example, the water fountain, the Wellington water fountain, or the Mulji Jetha water fountain, or lesser known sites in Mumbai, like you may have there's a pillar on the Kennedy sea face, or you might have the Gilbert Hill, which is an early ancient site, or the Ghodbandar Fort, whatever. So such sites were identified, or the VJTI. The VJTI has a very rich history in terms of history of science and technology education in Mumbai. So what these students did is they prepared a 5 to 7 minute video of that particular lesser known heritage site, and then made a group presentation. You had, architects and judges from across the spectrum who were asked to come and give, be the judges for this competition, and the students really enjoyed it. And the end result is, not only was it an exercise in the presentation and creating heritage awareness about these lesser known structures, but people are, in Mumbai, the audience and the wider the public came to know about these. And most important, the students learned to perceive these from angles which were not known before, because they then come up with their own narrative when they do these particular videos. The architecture students brought their own insights, and the history students brought their own insights, which was fascinating. So for example, one subject was Gaiwadi. Gaiwadi is a wadi in Girgam in South Mumbai, and as we know, very soon we find that many of these older chawls, etc., are not going to be there, or even if they are there, are very badly in need of heritage conservation. So you have these students, the youngsters, who began to learn about these lesser known heritage structures, ask questions as to why was the Gaiwadi called Gaiwadi, and then went into its rich local history. So why I'm emphasizing this is, you can use, have these innovative methodologies to make the subject more sort of relevant to society. And to give a very good example is Facebook. You can, if you have a Facebook forum, you will have our youngsters, even in the COVID context, who will interact with the senior citizens and know much more about Mumbai's history than you and me as teachers would tell them, because there are many, many facets of world history or national history, early, medieval, modern, and many kind of through the public forums which our students can learn, by which the elderly also will feel part of our education system, because our universities now are no longer just confined to a concrete classroom, and so are our students, schools and colleges. The world is out there. So our students, I would like to end by saying that ultimately I think we will have at some point an online classroom where our students, along with students in Africa or the US and Australia, as far distances, will be together enjoying a live online classroom. And I think that is the classroom of the future. So I think I would like to end by saying that there is a lot to look forward to despite a difficult situation, and let us as history teachers make the most of it and enrich our institutions, whichever institutions we belong to, our universities, and the country, in the days and years to come. Thank you for giving me this opportunity, and to the organizers of this program, that is to the Center for Academic and Professional Development of the Kaash Foundation with University of Ottawa and the St. Xavier's Institute of Education, and my co-panelist, Professor Bandopadhyay and Dr. Mukesh Kumar, Dr. Jadhav, Professor Vallely, Dr. Samuel, Professor Pereira, and Dr. Geeta. I thank you. And above all, I thank the teacher participants who are with us and for patiently listening to our talk. And I think we look forward to interacting with you and for your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Kamath, Professor Manjari Kamath. What a wonderful presentation. Really, wonderful presentation. It was dealing with the nature of pedagogy in the present scenario, categorically emphasizing the paradigm shift in the pedagogy of teaching history. Very nice. Here, Professor Kamath was not talking about just the past, but the creative past, and how to make the younger mind more receptive and more mature to face the challenges of the academia and also the life, the social life. Examples for making her presentation attentive. She talked about labor movement and also the activity-based teaching learning exercises, heritage walk, visit to museums, monuments. And wonderful thing was to start the process of writing a skill, which seems to be vanishing among the younger generation. So, and she was very cautious because she said it should not look burdensome to the students because of the 2 days texting. You have seen it. It hardly matters. I mean, grammatical errors or the words are, I mean, grammar and words are different, quite different. So writing skill should be re in the current generation. And she was talking about the interdisciplinarity to be adopted, and also the new education policy says more and more emphasis on the interconnectedness of different subjects. It was very, very, I mean, methodically presented paper, and I'm really thankful to Professor Manjari Kamath. I think history has gone beyond the traditional status of an antiquarian or leisure time pursuit to a very useful and indispensable part of a man's education. It has become more scientific and more comprehensive. It has expanded in all directions, both vertically and horizontally, and it has become broad-based and attractive also. So it is not an inquiry which says about what happened in the past, not only when it happened, how it happened, but also it's an inquiry into the inevitable changes in human affairs in the past and the ways these changes affect, influence, or determine the patterns of life in the society. In this very line, I was just thinking about Dr. Kaash, because I have found Dr. Kaash has done, a great job, a great service to the pedagogy of history teaching by setting the World War First exhibition. And I am thankful to him that he has been sharing all these activities with me. And one more thing he was doing in Mumbai, that he was engaged in discovery of underground water tanks and the restoration process. So these are the things which really connects the learners to the history, to the live history, to the heritage also, and it helps in building up the understanding of the past, so that they can they don't get not just the bookish knowledge, but also the practical knowledge of the things which happen all around us. As Professor Kamath was saying, that her students were interviewing the food vendors in some part of the city, and it really exhibit the impact of globalization on the socio-economic behavior of the people. And she also talked about family history and relevance of history writing in the current times. The paper is open for the queries, and you may put your queries in the chat box, which I can pass on to Professor Kamath. Professor Arun Bandyopadhyay, you would like to say something? Hello? Hello?
Professor Bandyopadhyay?
Yes, I wish to first of all congratulate you for giving a very, very lucid presentation of how to teach history in this post-pandemic, post-COVID period. And you have given a very, very good examples of how the world of history teaching, as well as history learning and history research, is changing. Very, very interesting thing. I had and the four very important areas in which these changes have been located, we have identified. One is, of course, is curiosity. Second is activity. Third is research and innovation. And fourth is what you have called a sort of a creative process.
Yeah.
Many examples you have given. In order to provoke you, I will give some examples which may help you to extend the areas of each of these fields. Let us talk about curiosity. Now you have given example of Narlikar's experience in Cambridge, how he actually got the entire world of curiosity coming in the classroom. But you know that curiosity is something which is applicable to all knowledge. So in addition to that, we have to specify curiosity in the case of history specifically also. So there, I think that anything that you see before our eyes, a child, for example, a temple, a mosque, a building, a street, an institution, anything that he sees before his eyes, his or her eyes, has a history. So sort of an engagement with the living things, that is ostensible thing, is one area. And you know that curiosity or surprise is something which is also part of life, and without which our life is not worth living. Indeed, this is one thing. Second is this activity is many types of activities we have given example. But I will give you one further example that you know that very recently there was a very important natural calamity took place in one part of India in Bengal, which has been fun. And many of history students of Calcutta University have gone to the remote places of Sundarbans to have some relating to the activity. And once doing this, actually, they will come to the real nature of the pandemic or epidemic or this kind of natural calamity. It can also happen in the case of COVID and types of knowledge. For example, new areas of history, environmental history, women's history, in Dalit history, etc., etc. In all these aspects, there is a scope of activity. In urban history, of course, you have given the example of your student taking the interviews of the vendors. So this is the second thing. Thirdly, research. You have given many examples, very good examples. I will only add that if you make a stock taking of India Office Library in London, you'll find the largest number of readers are actually coming there to know their family history in any single day. So these can be given, the students can be given a task to write their family history, for example. And that is a very good example of writing. This from the point of view of certain kind of research that you do, that you don't. And of course, with regard to the creative past, is many very good examples. I will actually only add, in addition to what Mukesh was referring to, that in pedagogical terms, this creative past, you know that there are two words, two statements: history repeats itself and history does not repeat itself. So these two examples can be searched. Actually, you will find that certain things are recurring and certain things are not recurring. There's so much history
Professor Bandyopadhyay is inaudible.
Actually,
Hello.
learn from this thing. So these are the little bit of comments and terms of appreciation. There's nothing more. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Bandyopadhyay. I think those are very pertinent points and observations where, as you say, our field is more all-encompassing, and how it's at a much deeper level when it comes to these four templates, how we can extend it to use, have many more such parameters while we can enrich pedagogy while we teach our students. So I will have made a note of it and will definitely benefit me and our participants. Thank you. I think there are some questions in the chat box. So how do we go about this? I mean, Dr. Mukesh Kumar would give us the questions, or do we look at the chat box?
There is a question which is related to the pressure of syllabus, exam, evaluation, and that pen and paper relates to, it is directed towards the idea of scoring higher and higher. So learning history remains at the backstage. So there is a query that should it be done away with? I mean, pen and paper and writing should not be taken, I think. And there's some alternative should be there.
Right. I mean, if I may answer this question, what I would like to say is these are just tools. I mean, earlier, the whole evolution of man has been through different, from the Stone Age. So, but at the heart of it, I think, and this is my view, I mean, which you may or may not agree. I mean, I think Ms. Aarti Gosavi has asked that question, that ultimately, I think when it comes to creativity, that has happened over the years, and that's why we've had so many innovations. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here today in this kind of format. But at the same time, I wouldn't like to say whether we do away and this. Of course, in the present times, many of us don't have a choice but to use, technology and these models. And eventually, the younger generation is, is not going to use a pen and paper. But I wouldn't give that much importance, because so far, I mean, the computer, although artificial intelligence is developing by the day, the computer doesn't know the kind of painting which Picasso does. Or I think, just to give an example, once
Oh,
Picasso Picasso drew a line, and somebody asked him that you are being paid so much just to draw, the way you did it in like 5 minutes. And what he said is he spent an entire life trying to do what he eventually is doing in 5 minutes. So Professor Bandyopadhyay, and the kind of knowledge and the expertise he has, is because of that he's able to this. So whether it is pen and paper, or whether you're using a tablet, or later, I think we won't even use computers as we talk automatically.
I think
They're
I
all-
think I think Professor Kamath, pen and paper is needed. I think for the expression, for the understanding,
yes.
to convey the idea, for expression, it is needed. So we cannot minimize the importance of pen and paper. Well, thank you very much for two illuminating presentation. And while listening to these presentations, something came to my mind which I just want to share with you. Well, we are going we are short of time, but just one thing, that the situation is present situation is COVID-19 pandemic. It is one of the gravest infectious disease crisis, and we fear that it won't be the last one. So we are living through history right now, and it is a wonder indeed. How are we going to look back at this time? How might future historians seek to write the history of 2020? So this is a question. Historians of the future will no doubt spend countless hours and pages analyzing the pandemic's socioeconomic, political impact on our daily lives. And you see, we are right in the middle, living straight through this watershed moment. Isn't it strange? We are living in an epoch-making historical phase, and we are quite aware of it. So I think it is the time we should gear up, and let's move forward and utilize the adversity of this pandemic for the benefit of academics. I'm sure we can do some history of people's history of pandemic. I'm sure the pedagogy will not only be incisive and attractive, but the virtual availability of the sources will also make the learning process of pandemics more and more interesting through interdisciplinary approach. And with this concluding remark, I would like to thank Professor Jadhav and Kaash Foundation, and of course the collaborating institutes, collaborating in University of Ottawa, Canada, St. Xavier's College of Education, for giving me the finest time to interact with two stalwarts, two historians of the day. Thank you very much, Kaash Foundation, Director of Kaash, once again. Thank you. Over to you.
In today's session, we gained immense knowledge from both of our respected speakers. Thank you so much for sharing this knowledge with us. I would also like to express my gratitude towards Dr. Mukesh Kumar for wonderfully moderating the session. We all meet again tomorrow. That's the sixth day of our second international FDP series. Two more prominent speakers on board, Ms. Pranita Kolaskar and Dr. Rajendra Yadav. Link will be sent on your respective WhatsApp group. Kindly join in, and please have your real ID names when you all log in. Thank you so much. Stay tuned. This is Siona Salvi signing off. Thank you.